Exodus 3:11 through 15. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and tell them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation."
Thank you. That was for him. We're going through this series, Heroes of the Old Testament, and eventually we're going to go through the New Testament as well. Just talking about, and I think you know it's obvious who we're going to be talking about today, but I wanted to talk about this in a different way today. And this idea that, first of all, just to kind of get to the point here right away at the very beginning, Moses was given an incredible task to lead an entire people group out of the clutches of another entire people group. Like sometimes I don't think we wrap our minds around that. It's just like saying I want this entire population of this particular people who are being held captive in slavery. They're not free to roam around wherever they want. I'm going to have one person lead them out. Unheard of. So, what's happening in this passage? Well, I want to, as I was thinking more about this passage and really what it was meant to convey to the first readers and the first hearers, I think this would be the best way to start. And I asked Brianne a question at the very beginning, and I want to know if you could answer me one more question. Or maybe it might lead on to the, okay, so you went to what college? Ball State. Okay, little tiny country college. If you ever heard of it, this is this little college up in Muncie. It has about, I think about now they have about 50,000, 60,000 students. I should know, I'm in education, but and they're a competitor. So you went to Ball State, and I won't ask you the years, but I think you went the same years as my friend did. I want to ask you if you know him. His name's John. Do you know him? No, that's a no? Okay, you don't know. Well, yeah, 50,000 people. Did you know any Johns? Okay. So, apparently she doesn't know my friend John who went to Ball State. So, the point being, by the way, here's another aspect of this illustration. Have you ever met in our congregation a man named Mike? Right? He is awesome. He is one of my favorite people. I'm not going to tell you how old he is or who I'm talking about. The point being in this illustration is the fact that I can say John to you from Ball State, and you don't know who I'm talking about because there's 60,000 other people that go there, whether it be online or on site or whatever the case may be. And the same thing with Mike. We have about 60,000 Mikes in this congregation. You know, and whether it be Michael's this tall or Mike's this tall or this tall, and everything in between. Let's just put it that way. The point being is that you may have, whenever I say a name, you may have a picture of a person in your name. Yeah, I know Mike. I know John. I know who this person is, I know who that person is, but someone you're speaking to who knows a lot, and you have him in your head, but who knows a lot of people by that name will have no idea who you're talking about. In the Old Testament, and actually throughout all of Scripture, the word God, as we translate it with a lowercase g, because if I'm speaking to you and I say God, you don't know what uppercase or lowercase I'm talking about. And in those days, they had the Egyptian gods. They had, later on, the Greek and Roman gods and all those kind of things that the average pagan person would refer to, like, there's the god of the air, and there's the god of the crops, and there's the god of this, that, and the other thing. Everything that was a thing, or a situation that was a situation, had a god that pagan people attributed them to. So this passage starts out with a really interesting question. And Moses, if you think about it, his name, by the way, Moses, means from the water. So if you remember the story of Moses, if you ever heard the story of Moses, his mother, his adopted mother, pulls him out of the water in a reed basket. And, that's where the name comes from. So we have Moses, who was then taken out of the water because in those days, Pharaoh sent out a decree that they are to destroy all of the eldest boys that were recently born. And to save Moses, his mother put him in a reed basket, sent him down the river so that hopefully someone would recover him, not know that he was a part of the Hebrew population, and take him and adopt him as their own. So that's kind of the background, little baby to kid story of Moses, just very, very quick. So his adopted mother now raises Moses in an Egyptian heritage. Like he's a part of royalty now. You don't mess with Moses because you'll get the wrath of Pharaoh if you do. That is how close to the center of kingship Moses is at that point. Adopted son. So he's raised under the heritage of the Egyptians, where they have gods for everything, just as I spoke about a minute ago. They had the God who was God of war. They had the God who was God of the sun. They had God who was God of healing and crops and reproduction and all of these kind of things. And you can imagine how confusing it would have been if I were to go up to you as an Egyptian child and say, hey, God sent me. Or someone who has been brought up in a long-time Egyptian heritage. This is the context in which the Israelites are right now. They have been raised for so many generations in the Egyptian influence and the Egyptian heritage. Sure, they did go off into their corners and in back alleys and tell each other stories of the God of Abraham and Jacob and Isaac and all that. They did that, but whenever they stepped out in public, Ra, the God of everything. They spoke about, in front of Egyptians, the Egyptian gods. So this passage starts with a really interesting question. And I wanted to kind of reiterate it to you with what I just said as an understanding. And thinking about that, by the way, that kids have already been born and have gotten older and have become adolescents, and all of this has happened in the context of the slavery of Egypt. This is all they know. They only know slavery, they only know oppression, they only know that. So we have verse 11, where are you here? Okay, here we go. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to the Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I'll be with you. And this will be a sign to you that it is to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship the God on the mountain. Then Moses says, and this is what I want you to hear, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? You have such a whole new generation of people that the God of my father oppressed and forced upon me was the gods of Egypt. Like, which one are you talking about? I mean, I personally, in the back alley in private, so that I won't get beat up or ridiculed, and privately we worship the one true God. But out here, if Moses is from this royal lineage now, according to my perception, and according to the Egyptians, and he's coming to me and saying, the God of your fathers has told me to come bring you all out. First of all, I'm going to say, as your normal Israelite, there in the bonds of Egypt, you're crazy. Do you know how powerful this nation is? And a lot of the infrastructure and the economy has been controlled and moved forward by slave labor. That's what the Israelites are. So, suppose I go to them, Moses says, and say, the God of your fathers has sent me to bring you out of Egypt. And they look at me, dumbfounded, and say, who exactly are you talking about? That kind of makes sense if you get in their minds a little bit. They don't know who you're talking about. But then God answers something unbelievable. And it is something that, by the way, when I quote it to you, it will not be accurate. And I'll explain why. He says, tell him I am who I am, or I am sent you. I want to say this because, I say that it's inaccurate, and this is the reason. Is because there is only one being in all of creation, all of the universe, the divine God himself, who can accurately say that and it be true. Does that make sense? Only he can say, I am. I can quote him and say, well, he said I am. No, he is, And that was a literary device that the Hebrews used back then to kind of describe the one true, omnipotent God. That is why if you ever hear about some historical things about the Hebrews, they were not allowed to say the name of God because it wouldn't have been accurate if they would have said it. I know it's all convoluted, it's weird, it's all twisted together. Point being, he was the one and only. The first question that Moses throws out to God, after God, and this is the burning bush story, by the way. I forgot to mention that at the very beginning, I apologize. Moses came up to the burning bush, up to the mountain, and he saw the burning bush. And if that would have happened to me, I would have been absolutely terrified. I'd have been looking for a fire extinguisher, like, oh man, this is going to set the place on fire. But the thing never went out. It's because God's Spirit had manifested within this bush and spoke to Moses through it. So, first question Moses has for God is a very logical one. He's one person, and he has to extract, he's given the task to extract an entire people group out of the clenched fists of another entire people group. Much stronger, by the way. Egypt was insane. They were insanely wealthy, insanely powerful, and you just didn't double-cross them. They were huge into emperor worship, so anything that the Pharaoh said went, and that was a decree from God himself. So, think about it this way. Moses, being one person, going to this burning bush, it's an amazing sight, and just the fact that you can hear a voice from it is even more amazing. And God speaks to him and says, I want you to be the person to do this. Imperfect as you are, as weak as you may feel. And Moses comes back to him and he says, how am I supposed to do this? I am just one person, and you're expecting me to take an entire people group out of another entire people group. And God brushes that off in a very interesting way. He doesn't answer like, okay, here's what you do. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3. He doesn't say that in this initial conversation. All he says to Moses is, I will be with you. It's as if God is coming back at his concern, saying, well, I'm not thinking you should be the one to do it anyway. I'm asking you, Moses, to be the vessel. I'm asking you to be the willing participant, but I'm not saying you're the one that's going to do it. God makes it very, very clear in this very first part of the conversation that it is God who is sovereign, not Moses. And throughout this chapter, we also see that God makes it very clear that it is He who is sovereign, not Pharaoh. It doesn't matter how many followers he has. It doesn't matter how many great ideas he has. It doesn't matter how big his army is or how big the sticks they carry. The point is, God is. To me, Moses, in all of his imperfection, I want to emphasize that 100 times over. He showed us, he was one of, and not the first, but one of the model intercessors for God's people. He was the man who was chosen by God to communicate with God on behalf of the people and communicate with the people on behalf of God. I mean, what a job. He was a man who was raised in the wrong place, under the wrong heritage, in the wrong context, in the wrong generation. I mean, if it would have been at the very beginning where they had just started their kind of journey in Egypt, before even they were enslaved, because they had lived there for a while. Jacob kind of initiated that. They had lived there for a while. They had kind of, embedded themselves into the culture of the Egyptians. But then they got so big that Pharaoh says, I need to enslave them so that they don't overpower and create their own kingdom. That would have been the easy time. Not when Egypt was practically ruling most of the world at that point. Let's just put it that way. They had everything that they wanted, everything they ever needed. They had no lack of anything. And here is Moses, put right in front of this empire. And God says, you're my guy. How intimidating would you have felt? Intimidated. How would you have thought, or how would you have felt if God comes to you and says, yeah, I know that maybe you didn't do good in math at school, or whatever the case may be, but I want you to take this entire people group and lead them out. Just go in there and let Pharaoh know that I'm the one who sent you, and it'll be fine. And then, just have them all follow you, single file line, let's get out of here. That was what he was picturing. Now, God didn't even say to Moses that it was going to be easy. Notice that. He didn't say that everything was going to go very smoothly. All he said was, I am with you. And then he told us what his name was. And he kind of did, and he kind of didn't. In the way that the Israelites needed to know God, I am. In whatever situation that you are, in whatever event in your life that's taking place, in whatever pain that you're feeling, God's saying, I am. I am sufficient. I am powerful. Fill in the blank, I am. And I think sometimes in our lives we get to that point where we kind of put God on the back burner because stuff's going on in our lives. And it's big stuff. It's not stuff that's like, oh, come on, you just stubbed your toe, it's fine, you'll be fine. But it's big stuff. And if we could just remember today that what the promise that God made Moses, that I am sufficient, I am all powerful, I am everything, I am in you, I am around you, I am beside you, I will be with you. I feel like that while that might not give us immediate comfort, it sure is something to lean on. You see, imagine what just happened here, or what was about to happen. Moses was brought to this burning bush, and God gives him a big task, and he says, hey, I'm going to do it through you, don't worry. And Moses is picturing this time in which he is going to gather everyone, and whenever they stop running, and whenever they can just like lay their head down for the night, whenever everything's at rest for a moment, they're going to say, well, who put you up to this? And Moses gets the amazing opportunity to reintroduce them to the God who created everything. What does an introduction look like? Your average introduction, hi, my name is. And that very event of introduction starts a relationship for the rest of time. You don't point to someone at random and say, that's my best friend, if you don't know them. So God starts at the very base level by introducing himself. And he tells us that he knew us before we even knew him. There's some comfort in that. The Israelites were a large people group. They were being enslaved, yokes put on their necks and their backs. They were told that they were worthless. They were only good for, building things that the Pharaoh needed. They were told on a regular basis that they couldn't amount to anything, and that them as a people group would be crushed if anyone looks at the Pharaoh even cross-eyed. You see, what we don't see in this is the fact that Pharaoh was very intimidated by these people. Not because of their God or anything, because he had 1 million of them that he could send to war, but there are just a sheer amount of people that they were multiplying and all of these kind of things. Why do you think that a long time ago, Pharaoh, his dad Pharaoh, Pharaoh Sr., he sent a killing squad to kill all these firstborn boys? It was intimidation. I can't let them populate. I can't let them grow too much because they need to be controlled. Sometimes in our lives I feel like that we get things backwards, that we think a life that is lived in the Spirit is the one that's under control and under a heavy burden or yoke. When God comes into our lives and he says, I am, and I am sufficient. I'm everything. When the truth of it is that we find more freedom living in God than we do outside of Him. Because we can be so held captive by our pleasures, our preferences, and everything that pops into our minds, our impulses. We can be so captive by the trends of the world around us and what kind of dance moves are popular. I mean, dancing's cool, but come on. We can be so inundated by the enemy telling us that we are worthless and powerless. And our self-deprecation becomes our religion. Our hatred of ourselves and the people around us and the anger that we feel becomes our sacrament, our ritual. But God wants to give us freedom in that. Daily. So, I consider a hero of the Old Testament to be Moses. Really. Because he was able to give himself over to a God who, while he didn't have any of the resources necessary, or even any of the influence at this point, because he had walked away from his powerful Egyptian heritage, he decided that, he's a hero because he was faithful. I feel like so many of us could reach that hero status if we just said yes. Not that that's what it's about. We're not here to do great things for God so that our faces can be plastered up on halls of fame or whatever the case may be, and that's definitely not the purpose. But God calls us, when we accept Him, He calls us saints. We're called to be priests and prophets and all of the apostles and all of these kind of things. And we are called with the power of the Holy Spirit to lead, help people be led out of their captivity. And while we're insufficient for that, He is. So as we go through this series of heroes of the Old Testament, then eventually we'll go through the New Testament, let us not worship these people, but let us remember that God can use someone just like us to do extraordinary things. Not by our resources, but by His infinite resources. His power is sufficient.